the other screen, that's why.
Yeah. So Ahmed is there. So according to this, we're live. Let me put this over here so that we can track comments here, and I'll also flip this around there. Once I see that the video is playing, I will pause it, although there's also always a little bit of a buffer. Let me just check this. Okay, so that is showing, so I will pause it. Ads. So I will pause that, and I will pause this. And what I will do, what I'd appreciate if you guys would help me do, is I will turn this around so that you can also read comments. So the idea is that sometimes when Rochelle or I are talking, and we don't keep up with the comments on the screen, but if you can see comments that also, oh, that's a good one, you can pick it up and say, Ahmed also has a great question. He's asking this. Can you, so if you could help us to make sure we're keeping, yes. So basically, I'm going to just flip it around like that so that you can see. That's okay.
Yeah. Whoa, that is.
And I'm going to keep the videos paused.
Good. I can ask questions.
So yes, you can actually help us kind of keep up. So the video here, I'm sorry it's square. I couldn't get it into a widescreen version, so it's a little bit tight, although I'm going to set mostly off screen. Hello, welcome to Japan Business Time Live, the first ever live streaming version of this that we've done. We are in GinzaHub, which is the place where we introduced Rob on 2.5 Oyajis. He's not here tonight, although we're going to get him on 2.5 Oyajis on 5th of November, so look out for that. But yes, here we are. Rather than having prepared questions and all this sort of advanced stuff, we are actually going to be able to take your questions and the questions of some people who are with us here, and not only have Rochelle answer those first, but even have a discussion. And we've got your comments are visible to the audience. So the whole aim of this is that we can actually have a big discussion about all the questions that you've ever watched our videos, talking about all this working in Japan cultural stuff. You can actually participate. And to kick it off last night, we actually set up both of our first ever Reddit experience.
Yes, really fun.
We survived. I was so scared. I was actually...
No terrible trolls making fun of us.
I was actually scared.
Except that I've replied to myself, which evidently isn't good. But. Yeah,
well, apparently that's not good. And I said, yeah, good comment. And I got like moderated. I got blocked for 10 minutes for not asking a question. So we have the bruises from learning how to use Reddit. But that was a really good discussion. I'll put the link for that actually under this video because there were so many really good questions. Yeah. And we might actually also come back to those tonight. Right. My laptop screen is bouncing around. I see it. We're not having an earthquake. It is a stability of the desk. So I'll bear that. I'll have to try to not touch that. But anyway, so yes, Rochelle, great to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And I will fleetingly, I think some people don't want to necessarily appear on the camera, but I will just do a quick, yay. We have beautiful people here with us who are also going to participate, and you can hear them. What I would also do is for people who don't mind actually being on a camera, if there's someone making a really good point or has a really good question or actually has a discussion and doesn't mind being on the camera, I know some people kind of want to hang off on the side, I'll invite them to come and sit in the hot chair over there where I can get you both in the shot with Rochelle, because it's not so interesting for the people watching the video to just be hearing voices necessarily. But I will keep it mainly focused on Rochelle. And please, if you guys could also watch the comments to make sure that we're catching the good topics that come up, as well as participate. Rochelle will lead off, I think, with the answers, but the whole aim is to make this a discussion.
Exactly. So we'd like to hear other people as well.
Yeah.
And I guess when you do that, they need to speak up too, right?
The mic's pretty good, but yes, appreciate if you could speak a little bit louder than you normally would, just to yes, project. exactly. Think of it as Shakespeare. So it's great to see everyone, and it's good to have you back in Japan again.
Yeah, I love being here. So
yeah. Well, let's do it this way. I don't have anything. Normally, we huddle and we prepare topics and we decide which ones to do, and we have a list and we mark them off as we go through. And I don't have that tonight. Tonight, the floor belongs to the people in the comments, and it belongs to the people here. And at the moment, we don't have comments yet because we started this early. So I don't know. I mean, Tia, is anything you've ever wanted to ask one of the world's authorities on intercultural work issues? Or
yes, actually, I do have a few. Yeah. It's a little bit difficult because I am not really in corporate and I'm not really in, should I sit over there?
You know, I'll just see where you are.
Sit where
Do
you are.
you mind if I put you on the camera?
Go for it.
Yes.
I think
Excellent.
I've been on one of your cameras before.
Yeah.
But hi, everyone. My name is Tia. I'm Tia, photographer of my company, Top Tia, and I'm going to ask Michelle a question.
Yeah.
So my question is, as an entrepreneur, many of Japan's corporate companies are becoming more international. Uniqlo, Rakuten, but some of the things that they're doing is making their business culture more English oriented.
Right.
And I was wondering, because of the Olympics coming very soon, is that sentiment shared with smaller businesses, primarily my clients?
Okay. Well, I don't see. I'm sorry. One sec. I don't see a lot of smaller companies going the full quote unquote Englishanization that Rakuten is doing, and because they're pretty extreme with it. I mean, they really try to use it for everything. Smaller companies, I think if they're starting to try to do a little bit in English, or maybe starting to get people to take English lessons, or they're kind of at a beginning, more of a beginning stage with it.
Okay, so less of a please speak fluent English by this date, more of a we'll support you with your journey of learning English.
Well put, yes.
Okay. Well, I guess one of the things that I'm trying to navigate is my journey is to help internationalize restaurants very simply with English menus.
Oh, good idea.
Yes. So one of the things that I've noticed is that on Gurunavi and Tabelog, they have this badge, and the badge points out whether or not the restaurant has English menus or English-speaking staff. And one of the things that I've noticed firsthand is you'll have several restaurants, and one restaurant is booming with foreigners, and the restaurant next door, even though it's close by, there's no one there. And some people have commented on maybe their appeal on TripAdvisor or Foursquare or other websites is very minimal or dismal. So that's possibly why they've lost it. So to go back to the point, my purpose is I want to use my photography skills to create photos to help foreigners understand what yakitori looks like, what ebi tendon looks like, and provide menus in their mother tongue or in their mother language or a language that they understand.
Great, great.
So that is my project, primarily influenced by the Olympics. Do you think that, well, I know I have a shot, I've been pretty successful.
It's very timely, very timely.
But
and there's so many restaurants, it's a huge market, right?
Right. But do you think that journey would be a pretty smooth journey for all small restaurants, all small businesses, and all restaurants, or will I have a rocky 4 years coming up?
Well, what do you mean by smooth journey? Do you think that they'll be open to working with you?
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think the big thing about all business in Japan, but particularly smaller businesses, is that introductions are very important. And so if you're approaching a restaurant, do you know someone who knows them? Do you know someone who's a regular at that restaurant? Or can you get involved in some industry associations or groups for restaurants, where maybe you could go and make a presentation, and then you become a sort of approved person in that world. Makes it a lot easier than if you were just kind of walking in and saying, hey, can I help you? They don't know who you are. And I think Japanese are particularly not open to cold calls.
Yes, I've noticed that. I've noticed more of my successful places, there is a degree of separation, or I have a regular, or maybe someone's very excited to be a part of the Olympic, how can you say, fanfare, and wants to get involved immediately. So I definitely see what you're talking about. The coldest of cold visits and cold calls. It is hard.
Yes, exactly.
Well, what I've noticed with the a change that's happened in Japan in the last 4 or 5 years in particular. First, there was the Koizumi tourist target of going from 300,000 foreigners a year to 20 million, which I thought was an insane target, and now looks like it's going to be achieved. And they're doing that through making just accessibility, right? There never used to be English train signs. There never used to be any sort of information. I remember in the 90s, like backpacking, 1995, and going to a tourist information center and being told that we can only give information to people on registered Japanese tours, i.e. we're only going to, this was in Aomori Station.
Oh, no.
And the tourist information desk there with the big circle eye on it actually would turn away foreign tourists.
Oh, that's really pathetic.
Well, that's back in the day because
Yeah.
because they're getting kickbacks from the tour companies in those
Oh,
days.
okay.
I'm not on a tour. They're not getting a kickback. They don't serve me. I mean, that's a.
Wow.
So to get the mentality to change around from that to actually promoting international tourism,
It's big, yeah.
I was really skeptical that it was even possible to do. I thought it was a joke when Koizumi said it. They've been really impressive how the change has been so dramatic, and the boost I think that winning the Olympics has given that as well. So from what I've seen and from what I'm reading about in Japanese media, now there are all of these sort of rural hotels and everyone with this influx of mainly Chinese tourists, but certainly foreign tourists, everyone trying to figure out how do I get certified, how do I get an English menu made? How do I get this sort of stuff? There is a big sort of push for these places that have people with absolutely no English who are running them, but they're in a panic trying to figure out all these resorts and so on around Japan, making sure that they're getting a cut of this. I mean, now I think it's just happened for the first time that there are more foreign tourists coming in through Kansai Airport and Narita than Japanese going in and out. It's always still been more Japanese.
Mhm.
So, I think the demand seems to be increasing, but I think people are as much etsy about how to find people to help, how to get the help that they need, as it is for people like you connecting with those people.
Right.
But what is really fantastic, and what I tell anybody who's asking, is that I know that the Tokyo government is sponsoring. They've got this massive government-funded budget to just promote and give this, Tokyo Tourist Approved or Tokyo
Right.
2020 Approved mark to any project that will foster foreign tourism.
Right. So that's so then how can you get connected with a group like that and become like a preferred or recommended supplier from
Exactly.
that? That's the sort of things you need to hook into in Japan. Yeah.
Thanks, Michelle.
So, Shell, any questions or topics or ideas? Burning topics?
Not just yet.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Come back to you.
Have we gone back? Does anyone? I mean, Emily, do you mind if I put you on, Emily?
Yeah.
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 Do you have anything?
You work with a lot of Japanese companies and a lot of foreign companies.
Mhm.
When it comes to negotiating contracts, is there anything that you should be wary of? Or like take precautions about?
I think negotiation with Japanese is really tricky because they don't do a bartering kind of negotiation that is often done in other countries.
Yes.
And I found that often Japanese will state a certain position and be very uncomfortable if you try to counter it. Right? It's almost like disagreeing with them, and not realizing that usually in negotiations there's some give and take. I don't always see a lot of room for give and take, particularly once they've gotten to the point of having some sort of internally approved draft of what they think the terms should be. The person who's quote unquote negotiating with you is really supposed to be just convincing you of those because it's already been approved internally. So really then the question is how can you be discussion process before they finalize their concept? And so that really is kind of it's like a namawashi sort of technique, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
Of, sort of one-on-one early discussions. But once they've already written something down and they've gotten like the bucho to sign off on it, like you're kind of stuck with that.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be very flexible. So you got to get them, start hinting at what you want really early in informal conversations.
Yeah. Thank you.
You mentioned Nemawashi.
Right.
And that I was actually about to come up with a question about Nemawashi and Rinisho and these kind of traditional ways of decision making
Right.
in Japanese companies. Is that changing at all a little bit, or is that
No.
just in
Not really.
Have you ever seen any trends or
Well-
companies trying to do things a little bit?
Well, the only thing I could say is that some of the newer kind of internet type firms, they don't really do it that way. You know, I have one Japanese mobile game company I work with, and they really don't do that. And they're like, we don't do that stuff, right? And they're very conscious of that.
Are they proud of that?
Oh, yeah, they're really proud of that. And so they do, like, you know, and they behave more like a San Francisco startup in terms of how they do things. But I think that's still kind of the rare case. I mean, basically, the Japanese organizations I see, I mean, that's how they're comfortable doing things.
I also wanted to add, like, how do they respond to direct questions? Because I know, like, a lot of foreign people are not familiar with the roundabout way that Japanese people ask questions, but from a foreigner's perspective, they're not really familiar with that. So how do you find that Japanese companies respond to foreigners directly?
So it's like related to the negotiation?
Yeah,
or?
negotiations.
I mean, it depends a little bit on the Japanese you're dealing with, because Japanese who've dealt with foreigners know that foreigners do that and are more comfortable with it. It kind of depends how, you know, it kind of goes back to, is this something that they can even negotiate, or are they kind of going to have to be making excuses for something that someone else decided? You know, they're going to be a lot less comfortable in that latter case, right? And I would say when I ask questions, I just try and be as like innocent as possible and make it not sound confrontational. Like, oh, you know, I just don't really understand this. Can you help me understand it? Tends to work pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ahmed Usul from the online comments, he's got a question, which is actually, this is a really philosophically interesting question. He's saying it seems that in the Japanese workforce and business in general, knowing people, being connected is actually more important. Is it more important than competence? That's an interesting one.
It is an interesting question, because I think they're both really important. And they kind of feed off of each other.
They do.
Because Japanese want to connect people to people who are competent, because it makes them look good to do that.
Yeah.
Or they're going to stay connected with you if they think you've done a good job.
Yeah.
You know, so I did a seminar today for a company where one of the guys attended one of my seminars in 2001. And he still had the notebook, and he told me about how helpful it was.
Yeah.
So he thought I was competent, so he maintained the connection with me.
Okay.
If he had hated that seminar, I'm sure I would not have been there today.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's no question that it's not pure nepotism. I mean, that exists, I suppose. I'm thinking, I know examples of where the bank boss's son got introduced to a job where he did nothing. I know that those cases
that
exist.
does happen, yeah.
But fundamentally speaking, what it's more about is that they don't know if they can sort of trust you or not. And basically, it's more about vouching for the person.
Right.
And so your credibility is also attached to the person, that you're kind of being in Japan, they're really big on this concept of hoshonin, these guarantors or people who are financially, if you rent an apartment. But it's kind of a social thing as well. So the thing is, if I put an ad in the Japan Times, this is for a lot of any job which used to be advertised in the Japan Times, you know, half of the foreigners in Japan would apply for them. And it's a great way to get a great pool of people with great qualifications. But to the Japanese company, well, sure, it's a nice way that you can check everyone's got all these certifications and said they have to have level 1, they have to have been in Japan 10 years, they have to already have a visa. And it can seem very tough. And even then you get 100 candidates. But for the Japanese company, they'll think, okay, well, all these people meet our criteria, but I don't know them.
Right. And I don't know anyone who knows them.
And when they've got that pool, if someone says, actually, you know, candidate 23, as someone I know, and I've worked with them before, and they were really nice. Oh, okay, well, we'll interview them first.
Right. Yeah.
They've got the inside running.
Yeah.
So.
But that happens in the U.S. too.
It happens sort of anywhere, but I'd say that the weight attached to someone being vouched for. I think a lot of companies, like in Australia or New Zealand, the whole HR thing is that they have this objective, fair, almost a judicial process about hiring and making people take tests, and a personality test and an IQ test they do all these drug tests, you know, they do all of these sort of things to make it sort of like a scientific selection process. You know, Google has these crazy, you know, interview methodologies and so on.
Yeah.
Japanese companies do not have crazy methodologies. They will have tests and other things like that, but in the end of the day, if you've got a pool of people all equal and it's backed by a recommendation, a lot of weight is attached to that. So connections are important, and arguably, it is important differentiating yourself. When it's a country of 120 million people, Tokyo has 25 million people. Although the job market is a bit distorted right now, it's a seller's market, but still, being connected, it carries a lot of weight.
I have a question connected to that.
Yeah.
I've primarily focused on networking and trying to get involved with other organizations, but one of the things that I found is from meetup to inclinations to anything, it's all foreign circles and foreign only. And there's not a lot of opportunities to really get to know someone who is Japanese. I mean, you could probably find someone who speaks both English and Japanese, and you can kind of get to know that person that way. But how can you, or what organizations can a foreign person get into to get to know said Japanese employers or potential clients?
Good question.
That is a really good question.
Could I make a suggestion what you think?
Go ahead, yes.
First thing is it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a photographer, I'm sure I've never done this, but I'm sure there are infinite numbers of different types of Japanese photography clubs and societies.
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
Oh,
A
yes.
zillion, because so many
In fact,
people have that as their hobby, right?
The thing is that it's primarily hobbyists.
Yes, yes.
So.
But there again, I imagine there must be associations and so on as well. And there must be degrees of where these clubs are focused on small business people or where they're people who just like to take pictures of doorknobs. But it's Tokyo. You have every type of club, right?
I'm sure.
But so you've got that. So lawyers, there's these law society things and meetups and so on. There, and even people that you meet and develop a good relationship through. You can hit it lucky just through a hobby club. You might meet someone who happens to be someone who will actually give you help you out. But the great thing about Tokyo is that there is an associational club for everything. So there is that. But specifically, networking generally.
Yeah, it's hard.
If there's not, it's so easy to start one.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
And
point.
get a couple of people, get one member that you can talk to that might be Japanese that can kind of jointly promote together. You can kind of more promote to the foreign community, and your Japanese friend shares that interest and promote to the Japanese community, and now you've got a great club.
There we go. Do it yourself.
Well, that's what you did with your business, actually.
And it could be the bilingual photography club, right? Or something like that, yeah.
But again, you've got such the fantastic thing about Tokyo is that you've got these people who are crazy into the hobbies and what they do, and it's such a dense population. Well, I could start up a New Zealand Maori song singing club and probably get 5 to 10 people to show up. And you'll probably do it. I mean, seriously, I'm absolutely confident, given the popularity of like Hawaiian dancing. If I was to start up New Zealand Polynesian Maori dancing, I'm sure you could, if you put that out in the right way, you could totally fill up a studio and get a night at a club. This is what everyone is. You look up Ainu dancing. There are Ainu dancing clubs in Tokyo and stuff like this.
It's
anything
Tokyo
you can
being so dense.
That's what I love about it.
40, 50 million people in the greater Tokyo area.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people.
So if it can't be found, you're right. I think it could be started, but it's not. And that's a very specific thing. We're thinking about you right now, but speaking more generally as well. This is the first sort of point. Being willing to search to Google in Japanese, Tokyo shashin, and you can say chusho kigyo kai or something. You think of keywords about small, medium-sized photography business association.
Right.
Something will come up.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, you'll get no responses on a lot of things.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things here. There's a lot of groups here. Yeah.
Japanese love groups.
They do.
So, for any topic, that's for me, that's like one of the greatest things about Japan, actually, and specifically about Tokyo. Does anyone have any sort of experience around this? So, Amanda, I know that you joined a lot of these associations, and you go around these things and you check them out. What's your view on this?
I didn't go to Japanese ones
That's
so much,
international.
but I go to, I just use Meetup.
Yeah.
And Meetup.com, and I go to like business networking groups.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to meet people.
Yeah. What's the Japanese participation like on those international meetups?
Oh, quite good actually.
Yeah.
And they usually speak English. Not always.
This is another good point. Generally, there are a lot of Japanese who want to join these. If a Japanese speaks English, they will themselves seek out these international
Right,
meetups.
exactly, because they want to meet people. Yeah.
And they're the type of people who are actually most open to working with and helping foreigners out.
Right.
So there's kind of that as well. It's not necessarily, you don't have to avoid looking at Japanese at foreign societies.
Right.
the last couple I went to, I sat next to someone from Microsoft and another person from Coca-Cola. So
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
It's some people from some big companies.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
It's just from a little group of meetup. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, well, that's one of the things that for me I've kind of shied away from, because there was a time when I did kind of go to certain groups or certain international gatherings, and they ended up being hookups, you know.
Well, there's a lot. I should think that too.
So-
A lot of dating-oriented sort of
The
things. Yeah.
mindset. Well, they didn't say it.
But that's what they end up being.
That's
Yeah.
what they end up
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
Well, I'll
So
tell you.
the mindset is definitely what I've become a little bit more picky
Mm.
about when
Yep.
choosing a meetup.
I've been to some really good Japanese events that I found through PTIX.
PTIX, yeah.
And, I searched a little bit in Japanese, you kind of browse and kind of see what
Mhm.
you can kind of see the participants.
How do you spell that?
PEATIX, I think.
PEATIX.
It's a ticketing site,
Yeah.
but they promote the
Kind of like Eventbrite.
Exactly, and I think it's a good resource.
Thank you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I've been along to, I had a friend who said, yeah, please come along to a foreign bar association, basically a lawyer sort of gathering.
Oh, the Roppongi Bar Association.
I don't want to say, okay, the Roppongi Bar Association.
That sounds like it could be interpreted into.
Well, that's the
I know, but
first
that's the
problem.
point. It's
That's-
on purpose.
that's the
It's a
first problem.
joke.
I-
The image went completely different when.
I really don't know, but isn't it? I think it's funny.
I thought
Anyways.
it was.
I gave a
Yeah.
speech to them a long time
Now
ago.
I have to
once.
rephrase what I was going to say because
sorry.
because I was going to express, well, when I went along there, basically, I'll say it anyway. I mean, it's called the Roppongi Bar Association. It's not so much actually hookups,
No.
because believe me, lawyers hate lawyers.
Can you
But-
imagine if two lawyers married to each other arguing all the time? That'd be bad.
But the problem is, it's more like a slave trading fair. It's basically all of these desperate headhunters who are looking for, for desperate lawyers who are looking for desperate jobs.
Oh, that sounds like a job search version of a bar scene.
It
Yeah.
was. So when I went along there, I was working at a good law firm and was stably employed. And it's like when people found that out, it's like everybody's trying to hand me a card and give me a job. I'm a headhunter. I want to change jobs. And it's like, and the whole night was like that. It's like, oh, I thought this was just supposed to be like a get together and a talk, but it's people. Again, sorry, Roppongi Bar Association, but
I gave a speech to them a really long time ago, and
Oh,
it didn't
and
seem
they
like that. But then again, I wasn't one of the lawyers. I was just giving
they
a
have some
speech.
good events. This was a drinks event or whatever, and it was kind of, and this was also 10 years ago. But it was kind of hijacked by the recruiters who were basically trying to, find people and by desperate people looking for jobs. I was kind of like, get me out of here. So I don't know. It's kind of, but again, there's clubs for everything. One of the things I did, which was not for looking for a job, was I joined Toastmasters years ago.
Those are really good.
Yeah.
Toastmasters are great.
Toastmasters last weekend.
Oh wow!
Really? Yeah.
Well,
And there are tons of them in Japan, and a lot of Japanese are
Absolutely.
really into them.
tons of them
Yeah.
in Tokyo, and there are ones that are English. So Japanese who want to practice English speaking. There are
Yeah.
Japanese language ones, and I went to both. I want to do the Japanese one, and the thing is, at those gatherings, you get a real cross section of society actually.
Uh-huh.
But you share a common interest, and they're quite social. You go out for dinner and drinks afterwards,
Right?
and
Yeah.
you'll meet the shacho who wants to be able to give the speech, and you talk about
Yeah.
the business. Hey, I need a foreigner in my company. In a way, if you're too mercenary about it and too focused as well, you're kind of shutting yourself off to those kind of things as well. It's
Right.
good to have these sort of hobbies.
Yeah, it's just you never know what'll happen from people you meet, but you don't want to go into it like I'm just here to meet people, because then
Well,
there's
that's
this desperation thing.
That's what I felt
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
was there. I felt like, oh my God, these people are, I felt like I was a refugee, supply truck or something. It was, the desperation vibe was very strong when I went along, and I didn't go to any more
Okay.
after that. Which,
Okay. Understandably.
so yeah.
Kind of the topic of headhunter leads me to another question.
Yeah.
If I will. What do you think about Japan, the labor market changing over the last 30 years, 20 years? You don't hear so much about lifetime employment anymore. That's
Right.
dead. They
Well,
say.
I don't think it's dead. I mean, because I work with a lot of really large Japanese companies, and they are still lifetime employment for sure. And the thing is that what they do is they protect those lifetime employees by having more people be contract employees. So then you've got this whole two-tier system that's coming about, which is really unhealthy. And the problem is that Japanese companies are so constrained by the labor laws. They'd love to have a more fluid labor market. I just spoke to a group of Japanese HR managers earlier this week, and they're like, we'd love to be able to fire people. And and I think that sounds really bad. And I think that the Japanese public, is like, oh my God, people might get fired. But frankly, sometimes people do need to get fired. If you have someone who's not doing anything, they're not a good fit, it's actually better for them to let them go on to something else. And the problem is, you have to it's like a whole gridlocked, like frozen together mess. And which part of it do you start with the ice pick on to undo it, right? Do you let the companies fire people, or like where do you, what parts do you fix first? It's actually a very difficult problem. And because Japan is very risk averse about making changes, it's hard to change anything. And so the only thing that they've been able to do is this, let's have contract employees. And that actually is not really very pleasant. So
that's a pretty traumatic change as well, actually, to get people used to the idea of non-secure work.
Yeah, exactly. And it's hard in Japan where security is so valued, right? And continuity is valued. So it's not an easy sell, but I don't know how Japan is going to survive if they don't make some fundamental change to how they manage people.
The ACCJ just did the diet door knock a couple weeks ago, and I participated in that. And one of the topics was labor mobility. And the ACCJ actually made a recommendation for a third type of contract.
Oh, like in between Seishine and
in between. It would be basically a pre-negotiated settlement.
Oh, Nick Bennis was telling me about that. It sounded really good.
And so when you're hired, basically you're agreeing to this pre-negotiated settlement, so you won't have that prolonged, drawn out issues.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good idea. I think that sort of creative thing is a good idea because you got to come up with something. Yeah.
Yeah, what I found really interesting is how it's changed. To me, there was always, you talk about the lifetime employment was like a social contract as well. It was an explanation. Expectation. You go to a big company, they look after you, you dedicate yourself to the company, you stay, work yourself to death at work or whatever. And that social contract's obviously gone. Nowadays, young people, I don't think they expect to even receive pensions, let alone stay in a company forever. And as a result, you hear in the news all the time about these companies are failing to fulfill their hiring quotas. And the attitude of young people, I am self-aware, maybe this is my middle age, that young people these days aren't like in my time. But I think young people these days really aren't like in my time. But in a positive way. When I see them, people in my time, it was kind of exciting, but it was kind of like you're joining a big religious cult or something. And then, everyone's kind of like, you have to go out for these drinking, you have to go out to mandatory golf and karaoke and all this sort of stuff. Kids, I say kids, but new graduates nowadays, work finishes, they go home at 6 o'clock. You don't see them. I don't know what they do. I don't care. I'm quite happy to let them do that. But, in the old day, when I joined, everyone would sit there until the last middle manager left the office just because they were scared to be seen leaving too early. They'd sit there till 10 o'clock every night because that's what you're supposed to do. I'm pretty sure in Dentsu, by watching the news, they probably still do that. But in most companies, I'm actually impressed by the fact that young people don't believe in sacrificing themselves for their companies in the way that
they don't want to be like their
them.
Parents were.
Which is actually, and that's putting pressure on these big companies that don't know how to deal with these people who are not behaving the way that they did.
And actually, it's a pretty big turnover of people within their first 2 years of joining companies.
Yeah.
Companies are having trouble holding on to these people.
Yeah.
Because they're like, I don't like this, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
and that's not something Japanese firms have ever had to deal with before. They're struggling. Yeah. So there is kind of there's some potential for change because of new attitudes, but they have to get better structures. Yeah.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
I have a bit of a trivial question. What do people do after 5 and until 10? They're waiting for the middle management or the last boss to leave. What are they doing? Are they on Facebook? Are they twiddling their thumbs?
Some of them are like on Facebook. Some of them just, I think what happens really honestly is that a lot of people never develop good work habits. Because you're just going to be there for a long time. And you also have, in a lot of cases, an economic incentive to stay later because you get overtime. So a lot of people have terrible work habits. And also, there's so much inefficiency in Japanese firms that, there's all this nemawashi and all the chosei and all the meetings and all the horenso and all the paperwork and all the rules and things you have to do and the endless meetings. So there's plenty to fill up your time. And so then there's plenty of work still to do after 5 o'clock for a lot of people.
Let me throw in, people ask me, I used to work till 12 o'clock and I had these Americans would fly in from the same company from America and say, well, these guys are sitting there doing nothing till 12 o'clock. And I wanted to punch the guy in the face because I was doing these meetings and this paperwork. And the idea that I see a foreigner and they're looking at Facebook, but Japanese, half of them, they think that their job is to spy on other people and, tell on them if they're using, so they're self-conscious about being watched and they won't use Facebook or they'll be very discreet about it.
Right.
Americans will kind of openly do that. No, I'll do that and I'd get kind of warned about it or something like that. So they actually are doing stuff. It's just that the doing stuff is more important than doing stuff efficiently. And in fact, doing something efficiently, I know how many times I was given till Friday, on Monday, given a task to be done by Friday. Friday, I want to leave early, so I actually try to think I'm going to rush and work really hard to get it in on Thursday. I get it handed back to me. If I handed it on Thursday, it's like, well, you're trying to hand this in a day early. What? You just don't want to do. They want you to use the full week.
Right, because they're it's work expands to fill the time allowed issue, right?
Yeah. It's not a matter of this is a 20-hour job and I'm going to compress the 20 hours or I'm going to do it more efficiently or whatever. And that'll give me extra stuff to do to fill up the extra day if I tried to get in early. It's actually so based on that, I learned myself. They want you to use all the time and fill it out. There's no shortcuts. And just trying to be more efficient is trying to take a shortcut. It's like you're being less diligent. So you're disincentivized. You're incentivized to sit there and take your time, eat some snacks, check every page, double read your document, to do everything so slowly and sit there till 10 o'clock. But they're not. But the thing is, so people come and say they're doing nothing. No, they're doing stuff. But it's just that it's not based around a concept of doing it efficiently, which took me a long time to get my head around. And based on that, you're in prison.
It's just discouraged, or it's just not even a concept. Yeah.
It's actually you'll actually be looked badly upon for trying to be efficient.
Right.
You mentioned meetings.
Yeah.
So many meetings.
Yes.
And every meeting, it seems like they all go 1 hour.
Yes. Perfect timing.
Exactly.
There's no meeting that finishes 45 minutes in.
Right, exactly.
Or 42 minutes.
Because your meeting does not have a concept of what it is we have to accomplish.
No.
It only has a concept of how long it's going to be. And if you had here's the 3 things we have to accomplish, and then if you finish the 3 things in 45 minutes, then you could go. But no one has that, so you never know when it's done, except the time.
Well, a meeting that finishes in 40 minutes indicates that the person who called the meeting wasn't sufficiently prepared, actually, or that they didn't manage it well enough.
Right,
It's like,
it looks
and people
bad.
will feel like, well, now I've got 20 minutes. Well, you've just wasted, this is valuable time that I set aside for this. And it's actually, you're supposed to be exactly. But it's amazing how, for so many things in the society, how people just intuitively do it exactly. They don't even look at their watches. They just know when it's an hour, and everybody just sort of, you take cues of other people's, and it is amazing.
Required training how to have a meeting.
Yeah, and you'll see it. Sometimes there'll be actually where, okay, this isn't an issue. Oh, then we don't even have to have this meeting. Okay, let's talk about that other thing. just when you think you're about to get out the door,
Oh no.
someone there is panicking, thinking, oh my God, this whole meeting is going to become this huge waste of everyone's time and they're going to be upset with me. So let me validate this time by thinking of some other way to fill in the time.
Right.
And I'm ready to go and it's, But, so what I deal with the Americans in my company right now, and if meeting finishes early, we'll give you your time back. Get back to work. Get out early. But no, never. Never with Japanese. But it's this whole thing. It's as much about the ritual and the attitude that you show, and it's just the whole thing with the staying late. I think the pressure to stay late, it feels to me, and maybe it's just the places I've been working is less than it used to be. But as I say that, it's been a real big hot topic in the news last week of multiple cases of working to death, which I associate with being something from the 90s. But
it's still going. We talked about this yesterday. It's still going on. Hey, you know what? I'm glancing at the screen. It looks like there's a bunch of comments there. Can we make sure that we address some of the things that people have are saying?
So first question actually that I picked up earlier that I said I would say, there's from another one from Ahmed asking, what's your view on is Abenomics working?
Oh boy. I guess that's my answer. No. I mean, the thing is, what the heck was Abenomics anyways, other than the slogan, right? And the whole thing that was really needed for Abenomics was the third arrow, which is just kind of went, it didn't really fly very far. So I don't think it's working particularly well.
It's not really clear what it is. I mean, at least they have some sort of a program, and I don't understand how none of the other parties even have a counter proposal to it.
That's kind of pathetic, yes.
It really is, and that's why I'm constantly I mean, I used to have hair, and I banged it on the table. I banged my head on the table so much over these sorts of things.
But if you think about just the name Abenomics and coming up with the whole thing was really brilliant marketing.
Yeah.
And it really changed, like it got kind of people revved up. And so it did have an effect. But the thing is, there's only so much you can get out of something that doesn't have a lot behind it, right?
But Japanese politics in itself, I mean, the idea of ever having a policy debate, I mean, even Trump talks about 4 or 5 different policies. I've never seen a Japanese election campaign on anything more than 2 or 3 very superficially treated sort of, slogans or policies.
Yeah.
Immigration's never been debated in an election.
Right.
And nobody ever actually debates anything concrete because policy is left to the bureaucrats in Japan.
Yeah.
But even within that, this is why the incompetence of the opposition here just astounds me.
Yeah,
actually.
it's strange. I don't know. And when I was talking with a Japanese friend the other day, and he's like, yeah, only old people vote. So I'm like, that's not a great way to base a democracy, is it?
Yeah. There's another one here, actually. This is from Azuki Island. A question. Azuki Island is a native Japanese speaker and planning to start your training as a Japanese teacher.
Oh, great.
So what's your outlook on the market for being a Japanese teacher?
Oh, I think there's lots of people who want to learn Japanese. Yeah. Lots of people.
Lots of people nodding
Lots
here.
of people.
Azuki Island.
Yeah. Yes, I know that. That's a really good point. I've definitely run into some very bad Japanese teachers, and I've had excellent ones too. I mean, so I've seen like every extreme, and so I think there's really room for really great Japanese teachers. And there's so many people who want to learn both here and abroad.
But
please do become a good one.
Yeah.
Please do become a good one.
Okay, so what do you think makes a good one? What's your thought?
So right now the trend for any kind of language learning is put more on the communicative aspect of the language, which makes perfect sense if you consider the fact that human beings started to speak because they had to communicate with one another.
Right, yeah.
The only big problem, in my opinion, that is still in Japanese language teaching is that, no, there are 2 actually. One is the way and the order in which to teach kanji. So they start teaching kanji as they teach them at kids in schools, which makes no freaking sense if you're teaching to an adult, because an adult doesn't need to learn kanji that have a very easy meaning, even though they're difficult to write, because they have the brains and the experience to actually understand complex concepts. But if I've never seen a kanji or I've never written one, I cannot really, like, it's not in my muscles.
Right.
So, like, the order in which you teach kanji to adults, in my opinion, should be revised.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the problem is, so this is one problem. And then they teach grammar and kanji also in the order in which the JLPT is structured.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that doesn't make much sense, in my opinion. Right now, I'm actually here in the student visa, so I am going every month to school. I have good teachers and I have not very good teachers too. I noticed that teachers that do have experience, but they're not like making an effort to actually get better and doing that. You need both things. So you need to have like a very good work ethic. So, okay, this is my experience. So doesn't matter what you get your experience, but anyway. But you always have to try to find new materials, new ways of teaching something, and just actually looking at the feedback from your students, and also do a little bit of research on which nationalities you're going to teach to. Because if you're mainly teaching, for example, to Chinese people, you don't really have to think about kanji that much because they already know how to write the majority of them. You only have to think about, and if you're teaching to Koreans, they don't have problems with grammar. But if you're teaching to like Westerners, that's a whole different
Right, it has to be very different, yeah.
And one of the things that personally I had a lot of problems with when I started to learn Japanese back in Italy, not here, was my Japanese teachers, doesn't matter if they were Japanese or Italians, they didn't tell me that Japanese people have a different way of thinking, and they give like importance in like a sentence to different things than Italians do, or than any kind of like other Westerners do. I had no idea, so I was like desperately waiting for like that word that for me was like the most important thing to understand in a complete sentence, which is not the case in Japanese. Like you have to tell your students, look, don't wait for that. I know you're waiting for that. Do not wait for that, because otherwise you will never be able to understand even like the easiest sentence. So when I myself was like struggling so much for so long, and I was just, okay, like I give up. And as soon as I said I gave up, I was just listening without even thinking, without even waiting for something. And then suddenly I was like, oh, I'm getting that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I spent so much time just like with a self-imposed like wall in my head. I didn't even know I had it.
Interesting.
And no one told me that I could just forget about it. And that's not just my case, but the majority of the Italian friends that I had, they studied Japanese at the same time as myself. We had the same problem.
Interesting.
Just we were not aware of it, and no one addressed that.
Huh.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still haven't figured out a way to study kanji in an entertaining way. Because a second problem with kanji is that like kids, until they are 10, 12, the brain is different from the adults. So
yeah, it's different.
that means that even if you teach them in a bad way or in a very boring way, they will still learn. Like the brain is like a sponge, because that's the way, that's like the time in which you develop, and you need all the information you can get. Doesn't matter how the information is given to you. But when you're teaching to adults, if the brain, or if you get bored, you tend to like, your brain tends to consider that information like not important because it's boring. Like, let's focus on something else. There are a lot of studies about like emotions and language learning and all that kind of stuff. And what happens when you're exposed to like different teaching methods. If you're having fun and the teacher actually makes you do something instead of just being there, like saying stuff to you and just writing it down, that it's not really working.
Right. Yeah, it has to be interactive. Yeah. And participative. Yes.
Yeah. And not student, teacher, student, but like students between themselves.
Yeah.
That's like the easiest way. And you're having fun. Doesn't really matter if what you're doing is not like super fun, but you're like, you make mistake, you laugh about it, and something sticks to your brain. Way easier than other ways. But kanji, I mean, it doesn't matter if I write it once or 10 times. It still won't stick because I am getting freaking bored. So is there a way out there to teach them in a fun way and in a way that makes sense, like for the order, for like an adult brain? Because the majority of people that move here for business or whatever it is, a lot of them just give up on learning Japanese because it's difficult, because it's not difficult. Like to talk with Japanese people, it's kind of like easy once you get like the basic grammar and you have like that like 1,000, 2,000 words of vocabulary, then you're done. You can like live your life easily, but then you have a menu or you're like on the streets, or you're like outside of Tokyo where like it's not very English friendly, or if you want to like read a book and you can't because it's like, what's going on?
Right. Well, it's a whole other level, right? Yes.
It's a whole other level.
So one thing I'm curious about. So when I started learning Japanese was 1989, and
not much has changed.
Not much has changed. Well, in those days, everyone was making movies about how Japan was about to take over the world, and we were all learning Japanese. And people who came to Japan in 1989 and who were learning Japanese in 1989 were learning it because of money.
Right, yes.
We were all going to become rich and help our new Japanese overlords take over the world. I was 13 years old. But that was kind of the idea. And then through the 90s, we watched Japan kind of go down, and we thought, oh, we backed the wrong horse. And now everybody's sorry. I sense that I've hit a pain point for a show with that statement. But we've all thought it. We all thought, damn, I wish I'd learned Chinese. and China's been coming up. And everyone's like, man, if I had Chinese as well, that would look so much better on my CV now. And it has kind of changed where the people who are learning Japanese are learning them sort of who are into anime or hobbies or culture,
Right.
rather than these, Wall Street, conquer the world type people.
Yeah, it's a little different, yeah.
So there is this thing, there's definitely popularity about Japanese culture, but in terms of being a Japanese teacher, what is the pull, do you think, of learning Japanese nowadays, given that the world has changed a little bit?
I do agree with you. I think most of the people who are learning Japanese now, they're fascinated by the culture.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people who are fascinated by the Japanese culture, rightly so, because it's fascinating. Although it depends on where you are. And, it's interesting because I met a Japanese language, the head of the department from University of Kentucky. And he says that he has people who come to study Japanese at the University of Kentucky because they're people who think they're from Kentucky and they want to stay and live their lives in Kentucky. And there's lots of jobs you can get in Kentucky if you speak Japanese, because that's where Toyota and a ton of their suppliers are. And he was absolutely right, that if your goal was, I want to create a future in Kentucky, one really great way to do that is to be a Kentucky person who speaks fluent Japanese.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of different things like that. There's Japanese companies all over the world and people who work for them. And learning Japanese is a really great thing for them. So there's that whole group as well that we don't see as much in Japan, but they're out there, right? And they're interested. As long as we're talking about, can I go back a little bit? We're talking about learning Japanese, and I want to tell everyone one of my biggest tips. One of the best things that I did when I was living in Japan learning Japanese is I took a calligraphy class.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and because before I did that, I never really understood the characters. I remember when I was studying Japanese in college, and there was stroke order. And I'm like, wow, who cares? Okay, you're supposed to write it like this. Why can't I write it like this? But the weirdest thing is if I didn't use the right stroke order, the teacher would be like, you didn't use the right stroke order. I'm like, how could you tell? I'm like, this makes no sense to me. And I'm like, okay, that's a weird Japanese thing is what I was thinking at the time, right? I'm like, okay, Japanese are really into doing things a certain way. But then also I was working at this Japanese company, and I'm dating myself, but before a lot of things were done on word processors, and a lot of memos were still done by hand. I know it really did. People are still alive today from that time, but anyways. So I would handwrite a memo, and I would give it to my Japanese colleagues, and they'd be, my handwriting was so bad, and it just looked awful. And so then I got introduced to this calligraphy school that thought it'd be really cool to have foreign students. Of course, you get lots of things like that. We happen to be here in Japan. And so I was at this famous calligraphy school here in Ginza taking classes. And once I finally started learning how to write the characters, I understood the form and the balance. And when you use a brush, you immediately understand why you need that stroke order, because otherwise it doesn't come out right if you don't write it that way, because it's because of the flexible part of the brush. It goes a certain direction when you pull it a certain way. You can't change it up. So I totally understood the balance. It made it much easier for me to remember them because they made more sense to me. And the other thing, and it made my handwriting much better, even though I'm actually left-handed and I would write calligraphy with my right hand. But even if I write, with a pen in the left hand, I just understood the characters better. And so I actually have fairly nice handwriting in Japanese, and that can get you a long way. And I hardly ever handwrite anything in Japanese, but if I have to really impress someone, a handwritten note, and I write it and my Japanese writing looks really nice, you get tons of bonus points for that. But the other thing it really did is that I can read a lot of menus that a lot of other people can't read, because a lot of menus in Japanese restaurants are done in calligraphy, or they're done in what's called kuzureji, which is, it's written in kind of a form, so it's kind of mushed up. But if you've done calligraphy, you can understand that. And I can't do it perfectly, but it just made my restaurant menu ability just like, you know. So yeah, so it just seems like a step. It seems like a basic thing, but it made a huge difference.
It's really fascinating because I'm the complete opposite of you. I actually love kanji. I love studying kanji.
I hate them. I actually love them.
So you have a frustration of trying to get to understand it, right?
No, I don't want to get bored when I'm studying them.
Here's what I do.
Which is different.
Here's what I do. When I was a kid, I actually learned how to read English by playing video games. I remember I was 4, I was playing Zelda, Link to the Past, and my father would never let me skip cutscenes. I had to read cutscenes, and that's how I learned how to read.
Oh, how interesting.
Yeah, so I thought, okay, let me do the same thing in Japanese. So I got my little Nintendo DS, I got the kanji sonomama little game, practice kanji with the strokes using the stylus. I did that with kanken. I studied and took the kanken. I'm at Q now. I'm thinking about taking the 6th one, but I don't know. Business makes everything impossible to do. But that's what I did. My love for reading and really wanting to understand everything is what forced me to get familiar with the kanji. Before I started my business, I was actually an English teacher, and I was the only foreigner in my office. So all the memos were actually handwritten. And I got used to seeing, okay, that's such and such sensei's handwriting, that's such and such sensei's. And so I just got used to seeing different styles of how people wrote kanji. And I love it, I enjoy it. I am the loser that will write a kanji 20 or 100 different times.
That's how I started in college. That's how I started in college. You just write them over and over. You have to do that. And it's a muscle memory.
Yeah. You are supposed to do that even now. And
but it's still the best way.
And in my opinion, it's like personal way of studying them. I find my personal way of studying them. And everybody's trying to find their personal way of studying them. Why the hell is there not someone that is thinking about a way that works for the majority of people?
But is that really the question? I think that's the heart. I think that's the wrong thing. Is because everyone's different. You have the Chinese student, you have the Western student. Should it be
if you target, because the problem is not only which is your mother tongue, but what kind of learner you are. Because if you're a visual learner, I mean, you write it down and you get it. If you're based on sounds and stuff, that's going to be very hard.
Could this work? In India, there are many English schools, and one thing that's really fascinating about in Indian English school is that you have English school for with a Spanish accent, or Indian school with an Australian accent, or English school with a British accent. So they're very specialized English schools. Would it be a bit more successful for foreigners if someone was visually based, or if someone was Chinese, and if somebody needed something different?
I do believe so. Actually, usually if a teacher is a good teacher, in a couple of days, they will know which students are visually based or whatever. Whatever it is. I'm sorry. I'm tired. And then, of course, because the class is kind of mixed, and also the backgrounds of the students is also kind of mixed, you have to try to find out kind of exercises that works for everybody, and not that works for everybody, that target specific group of people, and then the next exercise is for another group of people. So you basically address everything. Also because if you just focus on one thing, because it's oh, okay, all my students are like this, so I'm gonna only use this exercise. No, that doesn't work, because the world does not work in one way. So you have to be able to handle everything regardless of who you are. So
sounds like everyone who's in business should just take business Japanese.
There you go. Well, one more thing on kanji. Have you ever tried Heisig?
Yes.
I tried it, but it didn't stick with me. In the end of the day, I switched to flashcards and treated it like a game. But I did
the flashcard thing too. I did the little cards with the ring, and I made my own.
Yeah.
And then I would do that. But yeah, I did Heisei just as a
Yeah.
for fun, extra thing. Yeah, it's just like another thing for variety.
If you do it properly, I could see how it would
In
stick.
my opinion, if you start from scratch, then it could work better. If you're already like halfway through there and you already like had a bad experience with them, then it's just gonna be like, why do I have to learn like another thinking method or like
right.
Yeah, so I think it's SEISIG, right? Is
Yeah,
that-
HEISIG. Yeah.
Right. So it's basically
Right.
it teaches you what the different bits of the kanji mean.
GR, and it helps you remember. Like it's like, okay, you've got a tree with a square underneath is apricot, and then think of it as like holding your mouth open under the tree to have an
come up
apricot
with these
fall.
fun
And like has all these
mnemonics and stories for the
Yeah,
kanji. And
yeah.
it's intuitive because frankly, when Westerners look at kanji, we want to know what do the parts of the kanji, what's it that a
We
picture
want a
of.
story.
We
Yeah.
do want that, and this sort of satisfies that. But as you go more and more into it, you sort of realize, oh, that's the story that I have is so disconnected from the meaning of the kanji.
It's not really
It's,
helpful. Yeah.
You know, it's a nice way to get into learning it, but in the end of the day, will that help you memorize the 2,000 kanji
Yeah,
for
yeah.
level 1?
I just found it a fun kind of like
But it is
distraction. Yeah, a fun distraction. I have a really one other kanji thing that's interesting because like the thing is, I also think for us foreigners, we tend to beat ourselves up about like not knowing kanji. Okay, and so on yesterday I did one of my seminars and we had bento box lunches. And so the bento box came in and had like a wrapper, and on the wrapper it had like the name of the bento. And it had this kanji, I still don't know what it is, but it was tree, and I think it was like this, like that, something like that. And I looked at it. Okay.
You know.
Okay.
That one.
Okay, anyways, something like that. But it was, anyways, there's this kanji. And so we were talking, like, it was mostly non-Japanese who were there. And someone was asking me something about, like, how much Japanese you know. And I'm like, I'm always still learning. And I'm like, look at this label. I can't even read this kanji on the label. I don't even know what this says. And so then there was a Japanese participant. And I'm like, so I asked her, I'm like, hey, by the way, can you tell me what this is? And she's like, it's a kind of tree. I don't know. And then like the guy from the waiter comes in, and she's like flags him down. She's like, do you know what this is? He's like, I don't know. It's a kind of tree. Okay, that's about as far as I got too. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh on myself here because there are two Japanese people who didn't know what it was either.
But that is the moment where you can kind of just say, okay, it's
It's not so
okay.
bad, yeah.
I don't have to know every single
Exactly,
kanji.
yes, exactly. Because I was
Yeah.
beating myself up for not knowing it, and these two Japanese people
And
didn't
you
know it
notice
either.
it's always in the restaurant because my experience is the same. It was the kanji for brie.
No, that's what I say. Food,
Yeah,
fish.
The food ones,
Yeah.
fish ones are really.
So if you want, if Japanese are laughing at your kanji, ask them to write down the kanji for tara or for buri, because there are like 100 different names for fish, and they all have separate kanji, and they're all really similar to each other.
Yes.
And so on Japanese TV game shows, when they have the ultimate kanji test, it's always fish. There's always fish test. So if you want to, not feel too bad about kanji knowledge, fish are the best way to.
Ask about fish.
But I could imagine trees as well.
That's funny.
This is a really good discussion. It's relevant for a lot of people who are watching, but at the same time, there's some other great questions. Which
Okay,
have come
let's
up.
go. I
So
let's ask some of those too.
let me
Yeah.
move them forward. The Sergeant Bilko, hello Sweden. We have a question asking, what's the deal with every job in Japan for foreigners requiring a bachelor's degree for every job except blue collar? Doesn't experience count for anything? Good question.
Boy. Japanese culture tends to put people in categories, and if you have a bachelor's degree, it puts you in a certain category.
Yeah.
And I think they tend to be pretty rigid about things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I suppose, although I think increasingly everywhere, this idea that 90% of the population goes to college, it's sort of
Right.
increasing, but in
Yes.
Japan, it's always been like that.
Right.
So the idea that you knew what you wanted to do when you were 18, you didn't need a stupid degree. You went and started your own small business, or you went to a trade school or did something like that.
Mhm.
That's something you get respect for in New Zealand, but in Japan, it's almost like stopping in the middle of university. It's like finishing in the middle of high school for us. It's like you didn't finish your full education.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's this mental thing that finishing university is so normal here, and they hold us to that local standard.
Right.
The other thing is that it's also just a differentiator. I mean, there are so many people who I deal with all the time who are in the middle of college, or they're starting college, but they just want to come here. And how do I get a job in Japan without a degree? I get this question. I say, well, my advice is come here, check it out, but go back and get your degree.
Right, it'll be a much better shape, yeah.
Your options become so much more open.
Right, exactly.
Actually, my Spanish classmate, he's already 25 and he did some vocational something, but he does not have a bachelor degree. And he plans on studying here. He just got here, like, we started school like, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Yeah. So he plans on studying for 6 months and then starting to look for a job in the next 6 months. And I was like, don't you have a degree? Because it seems like to be a big thing here. And
yeah,
what can I tell him? Because do you think he's gonna find a job? I mean,
depends on what he's looking for.
Yeah, exactly.
He has already a part-time job at a Spanish bar in Venezuela.
Yeah.
But I was like, are you sure? Because that.
I mean, what does he want to do? What does he want to do, though?
I asked him. He has no idea whatsoever. He's open to any kind of things, and how can I say? But he does not want to leave Japan, like not even for a month.
Could he be? Is he an entrepreneur type? Could he start something?
I have no idea. He has money to like be here for at least 1.5 years, but I don't know. I mean,
so and in a way, this is the sort of thing again, and in the old days when people were coming for money, they would be very focused on career and all those sort of opportunities. But people, because they're coming here for culture now, they want to be here where the games are, where the JRPGs are, where the anime is, and they just want to find some way to be here. And they're not. And I deal with a lot of people who are not thinking through how they're going to get here. It's just getting here as soon as possible. And in that respect, well, look, if you have no ambition about, what you want to do with your life other than being in the land of anime, you can teach English, you can work in a bar. I know guys who've done construction jobs. I know people who work on ski fields. I know people who work on farms. Those are great jobs, and they can actually get quite good money doing them. There are all sorts of perfectly good ways to be in Japan that don't require a bachelor's degree.
Right. True.
But the thing is that if you do that for 3 or 4 years, well, there are places and there are ways. I mean, something like construction work is not a normal thing, but I know people who have gone out of the way and have done it. I know that there are farms that specifically have like exchange programs and so on, where they'll hire foreigners. For New Zealanders, we come and work during our summer vacation. We work on Japanese ski fields because it's the winter up here. Australians do that as well. So there are these sorts of things which you can come and have a really fun few years. The problem is that after a few years, the longer that extends, you're basically
fewer choices you have.
Yeah, in terms of, well, one, your choices become narrow, and two, you're basically in a career time freeze.
But can you build a career if you do not have a degree?
It depends on the career.
Oh, well, look at Tadao Ando, the famous Japanese architect. He never graduated from college.
Oh.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, exactly. You get into construction, you get into, you can own a bar. I mean, again, you can own a business. You don't need a degree to start a small business or own a bar or provide a service. And it might happen that you discover that you're good at something. So I'm from the mindset that I always expected to go to university. I was always going to do a job that required a degree. And to me, the idea of starting a restaurant is terrifying. Working at a law firm is safe and normal. But for a lot of people, that's the reverse.
Opposite, exactly, yeah.
So it's kind of like, you have to adjust those expectations. But for those white-collar jobs and the expectation that you have to have a degree, it's just... And the point around that is, if you want to have any sort of a career, if you want to use your time in Japan in a way that advances you for when you go home,
that's a whole other story. Yes.
And that is, I think you have to think a little bit beyond about just getting here. You have to think about how you're going to be here and how you're going to.
What you're going to do while you're here, and how you're going to explain it when you get back.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who come here, and some people stay here forever without ever confronting that question.
Right.
You can do it. But it's just the barrier to entry. I'll ask the next question. There's a good one from Andre L. asked earlier. How can foreigners advertise their business in Japan? And what are the do's and don'ts of well, this is kind of specific, but what are the do's and don'ts of a Japanese business card? Maybe not so much I don't know about the business card, but Yeah, how can foreigners, if a foreigner wants to start a business, how does a foreigner get a business started in Japan, do you think?
Well, it depends who they're trying to market to,
Very
right?
true.
Whether they're marketing to Japanese, whether they're marketing to foreigners, whether they're marketing to individuals or other businesses.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to answer the question without a little bit more scope.
That's really true. It's kind of funny. You can't just set up serving the foreign community.
Yeah, there's lots of companies that do that.
Yeah, and I always kind of joke, the Japan Times. Japan Times is a great name. It's an English language newspaper with the second biggest economy of the world on the top. But Japan, in a native English speaking community basis, is a really small country town.
Yeah.
It's like the whole country is like 100,000 people. Tokyo is like 10, 20,000 maximum, native English speakers.
Right.
It's like the number 10 ranked, language. So if you just want to serve that community of foreigners, it's like a little town paper, frankly. They get this great sort of thing. And sometimes I read it and I think, oh yeah, they're a country paper. When you read Metropolis and stuff like that,
Well, there's Metropolis, there's the ACCJ Journal, if you want to go after American companies. Yeah, there's all sorts of things like that. Yeah.
So you can do that, and you can just service that that foreign community. But there again, if you want to come to Japan and service the Japanese community, then that's a whole the opportunity. I always say the reason you want to learn Japanese in Tokyo is that in Tokyo, if you speak English, you live in a 20,000 person town. If you speak Japanese, you live in a 30 million person city.
Right, exactly.
Everything becomes accessible. That's why you learn.
Yeah.
And business and everything like that as well. But you have to sort of think, it totally depends on what you're doing. But there are plenty of foreigners. Rob, who we will have on 2.5 Oyajis on November 5th, will tell you how to start up and get your Japanese company off the ground. Tia, do you get many Japanese clients, or do you get?
I do. Most of those clients half of those clients I've gotten by doing the cold visits. Some of them, there was a degree of separation between myself and the client, but the other half of my clientele are foreigners. And I'm not on YouTube. I do Instagram, and I do other forms of social media. But a large chunk of my advertising comes from going to events, networking. One of the things that I like to do is I like to go to a big public event and actually photograph the event. And people see me, people see my camera, people talk to me,
Nice.
and that's a good segue for me to pitch what I do.
Great.
And I get clients that way, both Japanese and non-Japanese.
Nice.
So I'm actually not there passing out tissues and passing out. I'm not
No,
doing
that's
it.
not going to work. No, but I like the event strategy, because that's when you're connecting with people naturally.
Right.
And that's what you need to do. Yeah.
It's beautiful. Seeing you in action.
Exactly.
She could do that for my event.
Oh.
That's
Right.
I
Exactly.
gotta get her card.
Well, I want to see that photo that you took. That must have been a really good
Yes.
photo.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I get your card? Were you gonna put these on
But
Facebook?
Facebook, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I've gotten so many of those. I'll go to last summer. Or this past summer, I got so much business from going to festivals and going to concerts and just doing that, photographing the concert. Nobody hired me. It was strictly a choice of my own. Again, people saw me, or I went up to someone and said, "Hey, can I take your picture?" And that person wanted that picture.
Of course.
So we connect on Facebook,
Oh, nice.
we connect,
Yeah.
exchange cards, and then that was, or the relationship was made.
Yeah.
So-
Nice.
So do you think being a foreigner inhibits that, or does it actually help that, or is it neutral? How do you feel? Kind of hard to tell.
It's kind of hard to tell, but there are instances where if there is a similarity, then that makes the interaction, I guess, easier.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things that I do that are African American oriented that makes it easier. There are things that I do that are American oriented that makes it easier. But I find that the space where I thrive are people who have the same mindset.
Yeah.
Because remember, I'm not a family photographer. I'm not a wedding photographer. I focus primarily on enhancing businesses.
Yeah.
So anything that's business oriented, people who want to improve their LinkedIn profile photos, people who want to promote their products or showcase their wares, those are the type of clients that I'm looking for. So again, the mindset being synced between me and a potential client is how I usually get that client.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Michelle, as well, I want to ask you, you don't have to say who you work for, but you're from a company. How long is it's an international company that came into Japan. How long have they been set up in Japan?
17 years.
Okay, so a fairly long time, although you've been in Japan longer than that company's been here.
Exactly. Yeah.
So from that perspective, if you take a small company that wants to come into Japan, what do you think of the sort of challenges, generally speaking?
You know, it's a great question. You know, you have to kind of decide early on. We're actually right now in 17 years, we're competing with the big Japanese companies. So we've made that transition. But at first, it was very much focusing on the foreign community because we had to differentiate. And one of the differentiations that we did was we can support you 24/7 in English and Japanese.
Yeah.
So that was the differentiation, and we got a few multinational companies, serviced them well, you know, and basically word got out. But at that point we were 90% foreign based.
Yeah.
But then now, 17 years later, we have more Japanese customers than we do foreign customers.
Yeah.
So and I think a lot of that we have to look at that strategy. How can we differentiate? How can we add something, and then kind of build from there?
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, that's cool. Does anyone have any idea about Japanese business cards?
I mean, what about them?
Well, again, what are do's and don'ts of a Japanese business card?
I know one side is English and one side is Japanese.
In most cases.
In most cases.
I used to hear that the company name should be first, and then this is the old South. I don't know if it's
Right.
changed.
Well, I would just go.
Company first, and
I mean, there's you go to either Kinko's or whatever printing shop, and they have standard patterns, and I would use that.
Yeah.
Or have a designer do one for you, a Japanese designer.
Actually, it is a thing to have an interesting card. It's actually a
Yes.
great thing. These transparent cards or cool or plastic or whatever.
People love mine. I can show off mine.
Oh yeah.
I made ones that they open up. And they have lots of info on the inside and on the back.
Yeah.
And so people spend a lot more time looking at my card than most cards. So
Yeah.
I've just got all this info on it.
Yeah.
So it was my own invention. Thank you.
If you're planning to print the cards outside of Japan, you should be careful because the size is different.
Yeah.
It might not fit the standard Japanese meishi holder.
That is an excellent point.
That's something that I would take a look at.
The only thing, other than that, honestly, it's not so much about actually how it's formatted or anything like that. It's actually, there is a ritual around the handing back and forth, which we won't go through here, but there's lots of stuff everywhere about that.
Right.
That's a little bit important, I would say, but actually having an interesting business card is like always kind of a plus. And Japanese do it. They have these wacky sizes and stuff.
Or they'll have a cartoon of themselves on it or all sorts of things. Yeah.
I was just looking through my wallet to find some. This is one for a real estate company.
Yeah, very pretty.
And
That's nice. Let's go.
I guess there are different companies and partner companies. And then on the front, there's a logo.
Yeah.
The name is in Japanese and English. The title is only Japanese, and the information about the street address is in Japanese. But you've got everything else you need.
There is one funny thing you get with a lot of big corporations where they'll have English on the back and Japanese on the front, but the Japanese side will be kind of dense. And the English side will kind of skip stuff out and leave a lot of white space. And the reason for that is that they, frankly, most of the time don't expect to use the English very much. So they want all that white space so that they can write in phone numbers and write notes on the reverse side. So they use the right side for scribbling over, basically. When I first realized that, I felt a little bit sad.
I heard somewhere that less is better, less is more prestigious looking.
That's true. High-ranking people have very little on their cards. That's true.
Yeah, yeah.
So I tried for my business card. I've got my logo and my name and basic information, but it's pretty much 80% empty space.
Yeah.
I actually like it.
Well, there's so many different approaches.
Zen.
We'll design. We're gonna design your business card.
Oh my God.
There we go.
I want to know Tina's Instagram.
Oh, my Instagram?
Yeah, you should like.
Oh, well, I have two Instagrams. I have a personal one and a professional one. My professional one is Top Tia Photos. And you can also follow me on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Top Tia Photography.
Excellent. There's another good question here I want to throw out there. This is actually for Rochelle.
Okay.
How is mental health dealt with in Japanese companies?
Oh, actually, it's becoming an increasing issue that Japanese companies are talking about because there's a kind of a increasing issue of people who have, in particular, depression. Yep. And then there's lots of people who end up taking leave for depression. Yep. Right. And that's been, the numbers of people doing that has been growing. And so you've got, on one hand, you've got these, some Japanese workplaces have, too much work, or bosses yell at people, or people get assigned to jobs that aren't the job that they want to do. And so there's lots of potential reasons why people might get depressed. But that's not necessarily so different from when it's been. But I think it's become more socially acceptable to say, I'm depressed and I want to take time off.
It's so topical, because today I got a link from HR. Everybody did in my company. It said, we'd like you to take this 57-question questionnaire. And it's basically for that. It's a mental health
To
screen, and they don't see the results unless you want them to see the results. But it gives a self-assessment. It's an online service. You log in with your own password. You go through the thing. It's 57 questions. They'll ask you about your health, your my joints are, I don't get enough sleep. They'll ask you about your coworkers, your boss, things like that.
Oh, interesting.
And then it'll give you an assessment right then and there. Like, according to these questions, you seem to be doing okay. Or maybe it would say, maybe you should talk to someone.
Interesting.
So it's kind of interesting.
It is interesting, yeah.
I'd be kind of worried about that, because I guess when I was in a business setting in America, you had the thing called the grapevine. And I'm not sure how grapey or how viney the grapevine is.
Right, when do you feel comfortable doing that?
Well, when I feel comfortable doing that, maybe someone says, oh, did you hear Tia, she's got this issue, or Tia doesn't like such and such, And that seems as like, maybe leverage or Scientology
or something,
I think that's part of the reason so many Japanese people go on depression leave.
I did that survey.
Well, the office rumor mill,
it can be pretty intense,
Is it vicious in Japanese corporate societies?
Depends.
Yeah, it can be, because it can be you got lots of people who work together for extended periods of time for long hours. Under lots of stress. So it can, create some interesting relationships there.
And you get all different types of people, and there are a lot of people who I've dealt with over the years in different settings who consider it part of their job to sort of be, frankly, kind of busybodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, for example, 2 examples I remember from the discussion last night. I was once at a big Japanese financial institution, not an insurance company, not a bank, but it's a similar culture. And there are a lot of middle-aged contract office ladies in the office, and when there are also some younger contract ladies as well, mid-20s and sort of late 40s and early 50s types. And when there was one girl who was hired, or one woman who was hired, and she had quite distinct cleavage, and she dressed modestly, but not like a nun. She would wear a blouse with buttons or whatever, but you just couldn't hide that there was visible cleavage above the buttons, even if it wasn't a revealing sort of a shirt. But just the fact that was sort of visible. I was sitting near the Obasans, and they were rallying the troops. That sort of thing's unacceptable. Someone's got to go and tell her that she's got to cover up. She can't be showing that in the office.
I have been a bit doing this.
Yeah.
I wore a t-shirt that had a bit of lace at the top.
Yeah.
And I got told it was erotic.
What?
Really?
Yeah, it had a bit of lace up here.
Wow.
And obviously, I'm Japanese, I'm bigger in the chest, so it kind of sits a bit lower.
I mean, I think they're partly projecting their own insecurities.
Wow.
And it started off with, aren't you cold? It's fine. Oh, it's getting colder. Maybe you should put on a jacket. That was like in the morning.
Interesting.
Halfway through the day, and a different lady came over and was like, "Oh, your top is pretty fancy." Fancy, and I was like, there was like a whole heap of different obasans coming.
Singles, dude, they're taking turns. She still doesn't get it.
And then finally, some teacher went. Some other lady came over and was like, it's a bit erotic. And I was like, okay, why? And she said, oh, because of the lace. And I was like, this is a perfectly acceptable. No, it wasn't. And
It
I had
above the collar.
probably about the same as this. And I had a,
Yeah.
Lace that I see in Japanese
a singlet t-shirt and a singlet top underneath, so even if this fell
Really?
down, you wouldn't see anything.
Yeah.
Also,
So-
just the fact that it was lace.
Lacy, yeah.
Interesting.
Had lace along here and along
But the thing is,
there and-
that reflects the fact that multiple people, and that they'd obviously coordinated coming and taking turns trying to get Emily to get it. So this says that there's a group of people who have spent a material amount of their workday strategizing on figuring out about her shirt. And I remember I came back from New Year's where I had 2 weeks off during the New Year's period, and I just thought it'd be fun to grow out a goatee because I said, I grew out I didn't shave for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So when I came back to work, I thought, well, do I shave the whole? Well, it might just be fun. I'll just leave the goatee on for a while. When I was in college, I had a goatee. And when I came back to the office, one of the Obasans in the same company came up and don't think just because you're a foreigner that you're allowed to have facial hair.
Said that straight up.
Straight up.
Wow.
Straight up came up to me. And I was like, what are you smoking? I asked her what she was smoking. But she was actually, she gave me the like the angry shaking head talk as well. Like, I know that facial hair was made illegal during the Tokugawa period. There were specific times.
Well, I just remember, I think there's a lot of Japanese companies who do have rules
They
about
do have
this.
rules about it.
And to be really honest, I think it's a shame because I think a lot of Japanese men look really great with goatees.
Yes.
And
yes,
so,
yes.
and I'll just tell you a story from when I was in business school. One of my classmates, he had a Japanese guy, and he had a goatee, and he looked like a jazz musician. He was adorable. And I came to class one day, and the goatee was gone. And just let's say he still looked okay, but it just was nowhere near as good as the goatee. It was sort of like a crime against aesthetics, okay? So I just asked him, like, what happened to the goatee? He's like, oh, well, people from my company are here visiting this week.
Oh, yeah.
So we had to shave it off, yeah. So I thought that was really a shame.
I've been in a fight which got, well, it wasn't even a fight. It was a friendly discussion where I was a hiring manager and there was another Japanese guy, and I was kind of brought in because this guy would turn down everybody, and his team was understaffed and his people were dying from overwork. They needed to add 10 people, and I was kind of told to come in and cross-check, are we being too harsh? So we found someone, a really good candidate, qualified, interviewed well, everything. And the final thing was, I think we should offer. And he said, I don't feel comfortable offering. I'm not sure he's the right personality. And I'm like, what's the issue? I mean, good personality, fully qualified. He said, well, frankly, I'm just not comfortable because he has a goatee.
Wow.
And I'm like, well, specifically about that? Well, I just think, if he's got that, it's that hipster thing is just, he can't be trusted. I'm not going to sign off.
Wow.
And it was kind of like, and because this was such an issue, because the team was giving feedback, we're dying, please just hire anybody. And it was coming up in these HR reports to both of our report to in Singapore. So he called us both before. So what's the issue? And I said, it's the goatee. And this guy's like, no, what is it? and I actually had to help my friend by culturally explaining, well, to a lot of Japanese people, it's seen as being a little bit rebellious, a little bit wild and untrustworthy to sort of go crazy growing up facial hair. But I think he's very well qualified, and he's a very good guy, and he would be a really good contribution to the team. I acknowledge there's definitely a big facial hair problem, but I think we can live with it. But the Japanese guy next to me is like, well, I'm not so sure if we can.
So what happened?
We hired him.
Yay!
And
Did he keep the goatee?
And he was excellent, and he kept the goatee. And he did great.
And how did the other guy respond?
And the other guy
Is
was
that
always like,
relationship-
well, I'm going to keep an eye on it.
Keep an eye on it.
But the point is that, and I know when I was browsing Facebook in this company, it came back. Hey, better be careful, Simon. Everybody says you're looking at Facebook. Somebody sees it, they report, everyone goes around, then it comes back. Be careful because everybody's talking about this thing completely not, related to their work or not at my team.
And this was what year?
What year? This was 2002.
Okay.
2004.
Okay.
In fact, Facebook would have been new.
Yeah, I don't even know. There wasn't
So maybe it
much
wasn't even
Facebook.
Facebook in those days.
Okay.
But it was something like
MySpace.
Friendster. I was a big no.
Friendster.
But whatever it was,
Okay.
back in. But just the fact that he's browsing internet. This is my job, even though I'm a different team. But you can see you're in an open plan office. Everything is visible to everyone, and there are some people who sit there and they're not really doing very much work, but they feel like they're doing productive work by picking away at other people
Yeah.
about stuff.
Yeah.
And for some people who are a bit odd, for people who are not socially well adjusted, people who are a little bit on the autism spectrum, for example, for people who just have sort of those issues fitting in Japanese society, those things in an office environment where everybody's watching each other so much, and nobody will ever go and attack someone on their own. They'll go and get a consensus from the group. Yeah, that's really not acceptable, is it? And it'll be presented to you. Everybody says that's not acceptable, which in a society, all of a sudden it feels like everybody's attacking you at the same time.
I know, and people are very sensitive to that here. Yes.
And people will take depression leave after that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, it kind of turns into a form of bullying, right?
Well, it kind of is. But it's how the whole society works. It's this whole idea of you have to conform, and this nail that sticks out. And so, yeah, the issues about people going on depression leave and stuff like that, it happens, easily. And I think you're right, more attention's being paid to it. In the old days, people used to go on leave sick and they'd just quit, or they wouldn't come back, and you'd expect not to see them back. But I think now it's drawing so much attention, companies are actually developing. And by the way, the insensitive response to that, how do they deal with mental health? Seppuku was the first comment afterwards.
Well, yeah.
That's a bad taste joke.
Our company came up with a new policy starting this year.
Yeah.
That you have to use this year's holidays first before you can use the holidays that you rolled over from the last year.
Oh, interesting.
And if you don't use, you can only roll over your holidays from last year 1 year.
1 year.
1 year, yeah.
So they disappear.
So you may otherwise, no, let's not build stuff up. Yeah.
So they want people to
Take their holiday.
take days off, because they had a big problem with people never taking holidays, having 4 or 5 months accrued, quitting the company probably.
Yeah, and they have to be paid. Yeah, exactly. It's a liability.
So they
Yeah.
wanted people to and the health.
Health thing, yeah.
And what's happening is the Labor Standards Bureau is now doing audits, and they're checking how much unused holiday time, and they're saying, if you don't improve this, we're going to give you an improvement order. And that's a sign towards, if they're focusing on this issue, there's possibly going to be change, that they're going to be naming companies that don't do this.
How do they do that with teachers? That's one of the things that I noticed when I was an English teacher was female teachers would take off, take care of their kids or whatnot. But male teachers, I never ever saw a male teacher take a day off unless they had the flu. That was it.
Wow.
That was the only time. So I guess, what do they do?
Baby steps.
Baby steps.
From my experience, a lot of the male teachers use their holidays during, for example, summer, when the kids aren't at school and they don't really have much to do. So they won't necessarily take it off during the school year, but they'll take it off when there's nothing on at school. Or they'll use it by an hour. So if they've got no class in the afternoon, they might take an hour.
So-
Because they do it, they take one, you can take like an hour off, and you have 2 hours off. Even, I think an hour is the minimum, but you can.
So one thing, time-wise, we will move towards wrapping up, but I also want to get through comments which are there. So let's do some rapid fire.
Okay, real
And
quick
we'll
ones.
wrap
Yeah,
up
yeah, quick.
Probably
quick.
within half an hour anyway.
Okay.
But good question here. Why? Very good one for you, Rochelle. Why do Japanese still use fax machines?
Oh, yes.
Oh, man.
Why? Tell us why.
Give us the
Oh,
answer.
I don't want to buy a fax machine.
I had to buy a fax machine this year because the school required it, and I had to open a post office savings account because they would only allow transfers to the school from a post office savings.
Wow. I just think Japanese organizations tend to be very rigid in terms of not updating and changing processes. And a lot of processes were
It's a
built
risk.
around fax.
Yeah.
And so then they just keep using it and everyone's doing it. So, and it just becomes something you do.
Any new thing is a risk. If
Yes.
if they switch to email, well, what if the email doesn't work, or what if someone doesn't have email? Or
Right. Or
they-
people just get crazy. Like, that is sort of one thing about Japanese society, that people like worry about things.
Yes.
And let me just tell you something that came up in my seminar today, because I was talking about communication style and I mentioned show and tell.
Yeah.
And one of the guys in the seminar had lived in the US for a long time, and he's the one who took my seminar like a really long time ago. And so he like had told, evidently had been in conversation with other Japanese people about like show and tell. And he said, people ask me things about show and tell. Like in the US, like aren't people worried that like one kid will bring in like a really expensive thing and another kid whose family doesn't have as much money will bring in something that's not very nice, and that'll just like show up the differences in family wealth. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
That's a big one.
I was like, well, I don't have kids, but I was like, I never thought of that. And I'm like, I'm just not sure Americans really worry about stuff like that. I mean, but that was what like the Japanese people he was talking to were like focused on. And I just felt to me like overthinking it, you know? So.
Also remember though that in schools in Japan, the backbone of the very, very large and very successful Communist Party in Japan is the teachers' union. So there is that mentality
around schools
of indoctrinating equality and being sensitive to that.
Yeah.
But that has some weird outcomes actually.
Yeah, I know. When you told me that, I just thought, wow, that would just never have occurred to me. And I just,
that's what it is.
I just don't think it's really a big problem. Right?
It's a really big thing though, especially in schools. I found when I taught.
Yeah.
Even teaching about body parts was an issue. We were teaching body parts, and it was Parents' Day, and we had to alter the lesson because it would have been seen as insensitive if somebody had a family member with a missing limb.
Wow.
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 So we had to alter the lesson.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, but that's it. You know, that's right. So it's good.
It just as an example, but I think sometimes things get overthought.
Another question for you. How is a Japanese resume different to a Western one? This is also actually a very good question.
Oh, it has a specific format to it. And you just have to, you buy the form at a stationery store and fill it out, right? Yeah.
Where you put your picture on it.
Yeah, you put your picture on it.
You put your picture on it.
And it should be handwritten, so that's where having good handwriting is helpful.
You have to pass the
But one
good-looking
thing I
test.
noticed is that you have to give information of like, say you did a club activity or something and how that affected your life and like there's like a section for that.
Interesting.
Yeah, you have to actually justify how a club activity or something you did influenced you. There's like, there's a section. So that.
Everyone has a hobby.
Yeah.
Because you have to be able to talk about it, right?
Yeah. You got to have one
That's
thing.
terrible for young people. We do not have club activities inside school.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, we don't.
Seems straight as the same.
It's all about the clubs in the States.
Japanese resumes have a photo on them.
Yes, that's a big one, right?
In your choice school.
And then,
You're not supposed to smile too much in that photo.
right, that's true too. And also, the thing is, it's very much just a dry listing of facts.
Yeah.
It's not like the whole engineered to show off your accomplishments thing that a Western
Or your
resume would be.
creativity.
Or creativity, right?
Well, that's right. In New Zealand, I assume it's similar in Australia and America, the idea of how to write a good cover letter for your CV and how to, put in sales talk with the boys, number one person in class for such and such, and how it becomes a self-sales exercise. Whereas Japanese resumes are designed to de-sales
Right.
in some ways, aren't they? They
Yeah.
take it out and just make it.
Well, Japanese don't do self-promotion, so.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good. There's another one here. This is also really hard, but you can think of some angles to take this. Would a foreigner be better off working at a branch of a multinational corporation in Japan than in a Japanese company? Now, that's kind of impossible as a one-off, but.
Right, exactly. Boy, I mean, it's.
But I don't know.
It so depends on the company, and it depends what you're looking for, and it depends what type of work you want to do. I mean, we did a whole video about this. There's a lot of advantages to Japanese companies.
I've done both.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
and branches of MNCs in Japan are so diverse as well.
Exactly. Some of them are just like a Japanese company.
Some of them are even more Japanese than Japanese
That's
companies.
true. Or they're
In
like
fact-
a Japanese company from 30 years ago preserved in amber.
Well, the point is that, like, in order to shut out the influence of overseas, they deliberately isolate, and they actually become affirmatively nationalistic.
Some of them, yes, that's true.
I've been in these feud situations that happen. So
Oh yeah, I've seen them too. I've been called in to do team buildings for those situations.
Yes, that's where you call Rochelle if you're
Yes,
in one
call
of those.
Rochelle, exactly.
And then of course you've got branches that are completely disconnected here and living in their own gaijin bubble as well, and there are places
Right.
like that. And Japanese companies, there are some great Japanese companies, and there are some terrible Japanese companies.
Exactly. You can't generalize too easily.
If part of your motivation is to learn Japanese better as a language
Right.
skills, then working in a Japanese company would be a great experience. I
Yes,
think.
exactly.
I mean, you're definitely going to get that. In the multinational companies,
Right.
I don't speak. You will speak Japanese, but I speak English more than I speak Japanese.
Last one for tonight. This is from Mr. Korichep, is asking, how does the senpai-kohai relationship affect innovation in Japanese companies? That is actually quite a good question. And while you think about that, all the people asking, some of you have seen the Wing Chun training apparatus at the back of the room. and are asking questions about it. That belongs to Rob. So Robert Miller, the guy who owns GinzaHub, who will be back on 2.5 Oyajis in a few weeks in this room, and we'll talk about that then. But he teaches Wing Chun. He's a cool guy. He's a man of many talents. And that is very, very good that people pick that up. So last one, Senpai
Oh boy,
Kohai.
I'm feeling kind of stumped because I'm not sure.
Innovation. It's interesting. I could argue all the ways it doesn't foster it in a way, because it's the whole idea of the apprentice master
Right,
relationship.
exactly.
So,
But on the other hand, it's the way you learn the basics, then you can innovate off of that. So I'm not sure really I'm just having trouble making a connection there. I'm sorry.
I'll give you an angle. This might be completely, but as someone who loves Project X, which is this Japanese NHK show about how these inventions came about, in almost every case, they always happen by a disgruntled, frustrated apprentice who was held down so much and so passionately wanted to break free of being told that they couldn't do this by their company or by their boss, that they kind of exploded in this rebellion and did this amazing thing.
Oh.
So to the extent that the senpai kohai relationship really frustrates a lot of young people and provides that extra, that they explode out and they did Casio, the guy who invented the digital camera, did it in spite of being constantly, he had to do it in secret, did tests outside of the company, engineer and hide the project in his desk and sneak outside and do it. And when they presented, it got shot down like 3 years in a row. When they presented, no one would want a toy like that. And it's kind of the passion it was almost driven by the rebellion against that relationship that caused all of these great products. The Walkman, had all these issues, the digital camera, the car navigation system, the toilet bidet thing, all of these things. They're fantastic stories. And the unifying thing is not how this guy worked really well with his senpai and there was this great, they were fighting constantly against their senpais.
Interesting.
But that was
there you go. That's your answer, I think.
Let's begin the direct story. So basically, no, it does absolutely nothing for it. But there you go. Listen, this has been really good, and I like how it's picked up over time, and that's how these things always go.
Right,
and it's been good when it feels like at the end, like it's been cut short.
Yes.
We've been-
Yes. Well, that's what they say about the best restaurant meals, that you shouldn't feel overstuffed.
Yeah, I mean, we've been sitting here talking for 2 hours, and
It doesn't even feel like 2 hours.
2 hours.
Wow.
this live stream's been going for 1.5 hours.
Wow.
And we could easily do another hour, but we actually have to lock up the place.
We have to leave, yeah.
So this is cool.
Yes, thank you.
Now
Lots
we know
of
we
fun.
can do this.
Yes, exactly.
And this is a great format. I'd like to thank the people who came and also joined. I think
Thanks
this
for
is
your
actually
great
really fun
questions. Yeah.
that we can do it as a discussion.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to do this, and we can't do this in the space. So now we have an awesome place
Exactly. Thanks
which we
to
can come and
GinzaHub.
use. Great to have all of you guys involved as well. This is fun. This is a great way to do this. So
Yes,
thank you,
exactly.
Rochelle,
Thank you. Yes.
once again, and thank you everyone for joining in. And see you guys again on the weekend. 2.5 Oyajis. Look out November 5th. We are going to get the owner of this place on. I'm going to be back here, and we're going to talk about starting up your own company in Japan again. So we can talk more about this stuff. And I have in the can lots of Japan Business Time videos I still need to put up. And if you like this and you haven't seen the Japan Business Time videos,
Please do.
there's like 3 series already up that you can
Right.
watch of us talking about this stuff. So there's plenty of stuff out there. And follow Rochelle on Twitter,
Yeah.
Japan Intercult.
Yes.
It's not actually a cult.
Because
it's-
my company is Japan Intercultural
yeah,
Consulting.
consulting.
So it's Japan Intercultural.
The problem is if you put the whole name on, there'd be nothing left to be able to tweet afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah.
But she's got a really good. I have her on my short list of great Twitter accounts to follow. Rochelle puts all sorts of interesting stuff on, so you can follow and all that good social media stuff. And hope you really enjoyed that tonight. And thank you everybody.
Bye.
Stop broadcast.